They threatened a sheriff's daughter, not knowing her dad was a SWAT legend. They thought this was just another quiet town, a place where nothing dangerous ever happened. But when a black SUV rolled into Pine Ridge and stopped outside the community center, everything changed. And by the time the cartel realized who they'd crossed, it was too late. It was the kind of morning you didn't think twice about. The sun was out. Birds were chirping. Kids were on their way to school. Inside the ID community center, she was hanging posters for the youth fundraiser. Her name was known in town, not because of her last name, but because of what she did, helping people, especially kids who needed a second chance. The sheriff's daughter, yeah, but she'd earned her own place in Pine Ridge. She was taping up a sign when she noticed it, just for a second. A black SUV parked across the street, engine still running, windows tinted dark. Not the kind of car you usually saw around here. But she shrugged it off. Probably someone lost. This was a town where people said hello to strangers, but her dad noticed it too. Sheriff Hayes was on his morning patrol. Same route, same familiar faces. He helped Martha carry her groceries, checked in on the bakery after a break-in scare last week that turned out to be a raccoon. He waved at kids riding their bikes too fast. Normal stuff. But then he saw it too. That black SUV, parked, still running. No plates he recognized. He slowed down, took a longer look. 2 men in the front seat. Not from around here. Didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just stared. Something in his gut tightened. That old feeling he hadn't felt in years. But he didn't say anything yet. No reason to scare anyone. Not without proof. Back at the community center, she was walking through the hallway when her phone buzzed. It was her dad. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, why?" She smiled. "No reason. Just checking." She paused. "You saw it too?" He didn't answer for a second. "Just keep your eyes open." And then, just like that, he hung up. She stood, there in the quiet hallway, the kind where every sound echoes. She didn't feel scared, not yet. But something felt off. At Mason's diner, word was already spreading. It always did. Someone saw the SUV pull into the motel lot. Someone else said they watched the men go into the liquor store but didn't buy anything. Just walked around looking. Pine Ridge was small. People noticed things, but they didn't panic. Not yet. That wasn't their way. That night she had dinner with her dad. She tried to joke about it. "You think they're here for the fall festival?" He didn't laugh. Just kept eating quietly. After dinner, he went out to the garage, opened an old locker he hadn't touched in years. Inside were things from another life. One most people in town didn't know about. Tactical vest, SWAT files, photos, notes, maps. The kind of life he gave up to be a better father, to give her a normal life. He picked up one photo, a scorpion tattooed on a man's neck. He remembered that face, that case, that pain. He closed the locker quietly, turned off the light, and stood in the dark garage for a long time. At the motel, the 2 men from the SUV sat in silence. "She's the one," said the taller man. "The sheriff's daughter? She runs the community center, works with the teens. Everyone trusts her." They didn't smile. They didn't need to. They were here for a reason. And this town didn't know what was coming. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the sheriff they thought was just another small-town cop? He wasn't that at all. He used to lead men into cartel strongholds. He had scars not just on his skin, but in his soul. And they had just made the worst mistake of their lives, because this town, it wasn't defenseless. This town had a protector, and the clock had already started ticking. The next morning in Pine Ridge felt the same, at least on the surface. Sunlight poured through the windows of the local diner. Kids laughed as they crossed the street toward the school bus. Someone had already put up the fall festival 3 weeks away. Sign outside the town hall. But Sheriff Hayes wasn't sipping coffee at his usual table. He was outside the station, watching that same black SUV parked near the edge of town. Same model, different plates. They were switching vehicles. That meant one thing: these weren't tourists and they weren't lost. He didn't make a move yet, not without backup, not without knowing what they really wanted. But he felt it in his chest now, like a familiar weight pressing on his ribs. Something was coming. Back at the community center, his daughter was trying to focus on the fundraiser. Her clipboard was full of notes, volunteers were decorating tables, and music played from a Bluetooth speaker. But her eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the parking lot, to the corners of the room that felt just a little too quiet. She didn't want to admit it out loud, but she'd seen the same SUV 3 times that day, once outside the pharmacy, again near the library, and once driving slowly past the diner while she was having lunch. She mentioned it to her dad again. "They're following you," he said. "Or maybe they're following the town through you," she tried to laugh it off. "You think I'm their big target?" He didn't smile. "You're the heart of this town," he said. "And when someone wants to break a place, that's where they start." That night, someone broke into her car. Nothing was stolen. Not her wallet, not her phone charger, not even the coins in the center console. But there was something left. Behind on the driver's seat, a single photograph of her, taken that afternoon, walking out of the library, and on the back, a black scorpion symbol drawn in marker. She brought the photo straight to her father. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stared at the image, then walked into his office and locked the door. Inside, he pulled out old case files. The same scorpion symbol had shown up in his past, back when he was part of a SWAT task force that targeted cartel networks across state lines. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some scare tactic. This was personal. They knew who he was. They wanted him to remember. The next day, people in Pine Ridge started acting different. The owner of the local bakery stopped returning calls about the fundraiser. 2 longtime volunteers canceled at the last minute. A teacher at the school hinted that some parents didn't want their kids going to the youth center for a while. It was like the whole town felt something shift, like the air had gotten heavier, and his daughter felt it too. She stood in the center of the community hall and looked around at the empty tables, the scattered decorations, the banner that now hung, crooked because no one was around to help fix it. And for the first time, she felt a little afraid. Not for herself, but for the people who had always trusted her to make this place feel safe. That evening, as the sun dipped low over Pine Ridge, Sheriff Hayes stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the road. He saw a truck drive by slow, saw a man with a phone, pretending to take pictures of the sunset. The sheriff didn't speak, didn't move. But inside, something was changing. He walked back into the house, opened his safe, and laid out his gear. The one he hadn't touched in years: bulletproof vest, sidearm, tactical flashlight, a small box of flashbangs with a faded label. His daughter walked in, startled. "You really think this is that serious?" she asked. He looked up at her. And for the first time in a long time, she saw not the kind-hearted man who coached Little League or helped fix old radios on weekends. She saw something else, something colder, sharper. "I think," he said. "It's already started." And outside, that same black SUV rolled down Main Street once again, slower this time. And it didn't stop until it passed directly in front of the sheriff's house. It started slow, quiet, the kind of trouble that doesn't announce itself right away. At first, the town just seemed off. The coffee shop didn't open on time. The owner said it was because his supplier missed a delivery, but his hands were shaking when he said it. The gas station cashier, always full of stories, barely looked up when someone walked in, just kept glancing at the cameras like he was waiting for something to happen. People weren't talking as much. Not to each other, not to the sheriff, not even to her. She showed up to the community center the next morning to find 2 tables overturned. Nothing stolen, nothing vandalized, just moved. Like someone had been inside just long enough to prove they could be. She stood there in the stillness, staring at the mess, her heart thudding in her chest. And then she picked up the tables one by one, fixed the banner, and started setting up again. She wasn't going to let fear win. Not yet. But outside, something was shifting. You could feel it in the way people crossed the street when the sheriff's car came around. You could see it in the empty chairs at the diner, the closed blinds at the mechanic's shop. The town was shrinking into itself. Sheriff Hayes knew the signs. He'd seen them before. Not here, but in other places. Towns along the border where the cartel had wormed its way in, pretending to be businessmen first, then something worse. He was watching the same pattern unfold now in Pine Ridge. First came the quiet visits, then came the threats no one would talk about. And then came the deal. It happened at the trucking yard. The owner, third-generation Pine Ridge local, was called into a meeting with 2 men in suits. They didn't threaten him. Not really. They just said they were expanding business. Said they liked reliable routes. Said they'd pay triple what he was used to. And then they told him they'd been watching his daughter walk back from the library at night. Showed him a photo. That was all it took. He signed the paperwork, and when Sheriff Hayes came to ask him about it, he just shook his head and said, "Nothing to worry about, Dan. Just some new clients, that's all." But the sheriff could see it, the guilt in the man's eyes, the fear. Back at the community center, she tried to keep things running. She pushed ahead with the fundraiser. She reached out to every family she could, but one by one, they gave excuses. Said they were too busy. Said they'd help next time. Even the teenagers she mentored stopped coming. Not because they didn't care, but because their parents wouldn't let them. Only one kid showed up that day. He was 17, lanky, always trying to act tougher than he was. She found him sitting on the court with his hoodie up, staring at the floor. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, and she saw it in his eyes. He'd seen something. Maybe heard something he wasn't supposed to. "They're saying it's your fault," he mumbled. "What?" "The stuff that's happening. The weird guys in town. The threats. People think... They think maybe if you stopped trying to fight them, maybe they'd leave us alone." Her throat went dry. It wasn't anger she felt first. It was sadness. A heavy, quiet kind that settled deep in her bones. She didn't blame him. He was scared. They all were, but she wasn't going to stop. She knelt beside him, gently lifted his chin. "You think if we just stay quiet, they'll go away?" she asked. He didn't respond. "They won't," she said softly. "They never do." Later that night, the sheriff and his daughter sat in the living room, barely speaking. The TV played in the background, but no one was watching. Then his phone buzzed. It was a video. He opened it slowly, heart already bracing. It showed a woman tied to a chair, bruised, gagged, but still alive. It was Claire, the local news anchor. A friend of his daughter's. Someone who'd helped cover her fundraiser in the past. Someone who'd been asking too many questions. The camera zoomed in on her tear-streaked face. Then the voice came through. Digitally distorted. Cold. "This is what happens when people don't listen. When they speak out. You wanted attention? You've got it now." Then the video cut. His daughter stood frozen. "They took her. Because of me," she whispered. "No," the sheriff said, standing slowly. "They took her because that's who they are." She looked at him, eyes wide, frightened, but something else was there too. Resolve. He walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a binder, opened it on the table. Maps, photos, tactics. The past he had tried to bury was back on the table. They want a war, he said quietly. They just started one. And for the first time in days, his daughter didn't look scared anymore. She nodded once. Then let's fight. The night was colder than usual. The stars were out, but they felt far away, like they were watching from a place untouched by fear. Inside their quiet house, the sheriff sat at the kitchen table, maps spread across the surface, his old SWAT gear piled beside him. His daughter stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes searching the empty road outside. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. After the video of Claire, everything had changed. No more pretending this would pass. No more hoping the town would stay untouched. It was here now. The storm. And it had a face. The sheriff flipped through one of his old folders, photos from a raid years ago. The scorpion tattoo appeared again and again, on crates, on bodies, on walls. Back then, he thought that taking down one base would stop it. He was wrong. Now it was here. Not in a border town, not in a big city, but here, in Pine Ridge. A town that still had church bake sales and garage keys left under doormats. And they thought it would be easy. That was their mistake. He pulled out his phone and made a call he hadn't made in years. "Jack," he said quietly when the line picked up. "I need you." There was silence on the other end. Then, "It's about the scorpion, isn't it?" "It's here," the sheriff said. "And they took someone." "I'll bring the team." He hung up, staring at the phone for a moment longer, then turned to his daughter. "You trust me?" he asked. She nodded. No hesitation. "Then starting tomorrow," he said, "we do things my way." The next day, she watched her father move like a different man. Not the sheriff who handed out warnings about cracked taillights. This was someone else, calculated, precise, quiet when it mattered, commanding when it didn't. He met with his deputy, Sam, in the back lot of the station. "No more official reports," he told him. "We go off the record. No radio. No paper trail." Sam blinked. "Are we really doing this?" "If we don't," the sheriff said, "someone else is going to die." Meanwhile, his daughter had work of her own. She walked the community center, halls alone, picking up papers, fixing chairs, taping up corners of a banner that had started to sag. But her mind wasn't on decorations. She was thinking about the kids, the ones who stopped showing up, the ones who looked scared when they passed her on the street, and the one who said it was all her fault. Maybe he was right, she thought. Maybe, if she'd just shut it all down, backed away quietly, things wouldn't have gone this far. But then she remembered Claire's face in that video. No. Backing down wouldn't save anyone. It would only tell the people doing this that it worked, and she wasn't going to be another reason they won. She pulled out her laptop and started tracking every unusual thing she'd seen in the past few days. Cars that didn't belong. Faces she didn't recognize. She made notes, timestamps, routes. She even pulled old security footage from the parking lot. She wasn't a fighter, not like her dad, but she could do something else. She could think. That night, she handed her notes to her father. He sat with them, eyes moving slowly over every detail. "You're doing more than I ever expected," he said quietly. She shrugged. "You always told me to pay attention." He nodded, then reached across the table and opened a different folder. Inside were aerial photos of a building outside of town, a warehouse. "This," he said, "is where I think they're operating." "From?" She looked at the photos. "How do you know?" "Because it's the same layout they used in Juarez. Because it's got cameras at every corner but no company name. And because I asked around and not one person can tell me what they store there." She looked up at him. "So what now?" He leaned back in his chair. "We hit them before they hit us again." The next day, Jack arrived. Older now, grayer, but still moving like a man who hadn't forgotten what it meant to walk into danger. He brought two more with him, people her father had once trusted with his life. The team didn't wear uniforms. They didn't drive official vehicles. But when they stood in a room together, the air changed. They didn't ask questions, just got to work. Her dad briefed them like clockwork, every word clear, every risk laid out. She listened from the hallway, heart pounding. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. That night, she sat alone in her room, watching self-defense videos. She practiced with a wooden stick in the backyard until her arms ached. When her dad found her out there, she didn't stop. "Teach me," she said breathlessly. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. And they stayed out there until the moon was high and the cold crept in, and the shadows from the trees made everything feel like a battlefield. Because it was. And the next battle? It was coming fast. By the time the weekend came, Pine Ridge wasn't the same town anymore. It still looked the same. Kids playing near the fire station, wind chimes clinking gently outside old porches, flags fluttering from light poles. But underneath it all, something had shifted. People were scared. That part hadn't changed, but now they were also angry. The turning point wasn't a shootout or a headline. It was the fundraiser, or what was left of it. The sheriff's daughter arrived early that morning, arms full of flyers, expecting to find her volunteers waiting. Instead, she found silence. The community hall was dark, tables overturned, chairs scattered. And across the stage backdrop, someone had spray-painted 2 words in red. "Stay down." She stood there for a long time, staring at the message. Then she took a deep breath, grabbed a rag, and started wiping the wall. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from resolve. People began arriving slowly, first out of concern, then with offers to help. Parents, teens, even the retired librarian showed up with a mop. They didn't say much, but the looks in their eyes said it all. They were done being afraid. That same morning, the sheriff met with his team in an abandoned grain barn outside town. Jack, Sam, and the 2 other old friends sat around a table, eyes on the map. 3 black SUVs had been spotted circling the school. One parked near the truck yard, another near the church. "They're watching everything," the sheriff said, "but they're not used to being watched themselves." He pulled out a flash drive, his daughter's surveillance logs. "License plates, routes, timestamps. These are our openings." Jack grinned. "Good girl. She's her mother's." "Daughter," the sheriff replied, voice soft for a moment. Then the plan came together. Not just a raid, but something smarter. They were going to hurt the cartel where it counted. The money. That night, as most of Pine Ridge slept, 3 of the sheriff's team intercepted a black SUV outside the warehouse. It wasn't a shootout. It was precise, quick, clean. The cartel enforcers never knew what hit them. By the time the sheriff opened the trunk of the SUV, he already knew what he'd find. Cash, stacked in neat bundles, more than enough to fund whatever operation the cartel was running through town. He took photos, bagged what he could, left the rest burning. A message. The next morning, the town woke, up to rumors. Someone hit the cartel. Someone stood up. And that was when things got dangerous. The sheriff got the call before sunrise. Fire. The community center was burning. He and his daughter arrived at the same time, tires screeching, hearts sinking. Flames roared through the roof, black smoke curling into the sky. The banner they'd hung for the youth program sagged and crumbled in the heat. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face. Not from the smoke, from heartbreak. This place wasn't just a building. It was everything she'd worked for, everything her mother had believed in. The one place in town where kids felt safe. Gone. But even then, as she watched it collapse, she whispered through clenched teeth, "They don't win, Back at the sheriff's office, Sam brought in a flash drive someone had dropped anonymously into the mailbox. It was security footage from the church lot, the black SUV. The license plate matched the one from the truck yard earlier in the week. "They're connected," Sam said. "And they know we're fighting back." The sheriff nodded, jaw tight. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, no video, just a photo. His daughter at the grocery store, taken 2 hours earlier. The caption said, "Next time, we don't miss." He didn't show her the photo. He couldn't. But that night, he checked the locks 3 times, slept in the chair by the door. Gun on the table, eyes never fully closed. Across town, in a dim motel room, a man with a scar along his jawline stared at a map of Pine Ridge. He circled 3 places in red. The sheriff's house, the high school, and the diner. Then he made a call. "Too much resistance," he said into the phone. "We need to finish this. Fast." The voice on the other end said nothing for a long time. Then, "Break the daughter. The sheriff will follow." Back at home, the sheriff and his daughter sat on the back porch. She stared into the darkness, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "I want to do more," she whispered. "You already have," her father said. "Not enough." He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the same girl who'd run youth meetings and color-coded sign-up sheets. She was harder now, sharper, but still standing. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just his fight anymore, it was hers too. He reached for the vest beside his chair and placed it on the table between them. "If you're serious," he said, "we start tomorrow." She didn't hesitate. "I'm in." And somewhere, in the shadows beyond the porch light, a figure stood watching, waiting. Because Pine Ridge wasn't going to surrender, and the cartel wasn't going to walk away. The next move would change everything. It happened on a Thursday. The town was still shaking from the community center fire, and Sheriff Hayes knew the cartel wasn't done. He felt it in his chest, the way a storm brews before the clouds ever roll in. But he didn't expect this. He was halfway through organizing files at the station when his phone rang. Not a number he recognized. No caller ID. He picked it up. No voice on the other end, just silence. And then a sound, a faint whimper, followed by muffled crying. Then the call ended. He stood frozen for a moment. Then it came, a text message. "Check your front porch." He drove like the road was burning. When he got there, he didn't even put the car in park. He ran straight up the porch steps. There, at the door, was a cardboard box, taped shut. No markings. He stared at it. His daughter, who had just come out of the kitchen, froze too. "Dad?" He didn't answer. Just crouched, opened the lid carefully. Inside wasn't a bomb. It was worse. A phone. Still recording, and next to it, a bloodied scarf. One he recognized. Claire's scarf. He picked up the phone and pressed play. The screen lit up with a shaky video. Claire was tied to a chair, eyes swollen, lips cracked. She was whispering something too quiet to hear, and then a voice, digitally masked, low and cold, spoke clearly. "You have one chance. Leave Pine Ridge, tonight, or we send back more than just fabric." He turned off the phone. No words, just rage. He walked past his daughter without a sound, straight to the garage, and opened the steel cabinet he hadn't touched in years. Inside were weapons, tactical gear, his old team patches, things he promised, himself he'd never use again. But promises didn't matter anymore. They'd crossed the line. That evening, he met Jack and the rest of the team in the old grain barn again. No more maps, no more watching from a distance. It was time to act. "This ends tomorrow," the sheriff said. "We go in. We bring her home." Jack nodded. "We'll need more than firepower." "We've got it," the sheriff said. We've got them scared now. They overplayed their hand. They had something else now, too. His daughter. She showed up at the barn with a duffel bag and her mother's old jacket. I know the terrain better than anyone, she said. If you're going in there, I'm going too. No, the sheriff said instantly. Absolutely not. She looked him dead in the eyes. I'm not asking for permission. He stared at her, then nodded once. Then you're staying by my side. Every step. That night, Pine Ridge felt like a city under curfew. People didn't say anything, but they knew something was coming. Kids stayed home. Lights were off early. Even the diner closed before sunset. Word had spread. Sheriff Hayes was preparing for war, and across town, in a dim warehouse, Claire sat tied to a chair, her wrists raw, her spirit flickering but not gone. One of the cartel enforcers checked his watch. They're coming, aren't they? The other one nodded. Let them. We've got orders. Claire coughed, then smiled through bloodied lips. You really think he's coming alone? They didn't answer. But deep down, they were wondering the same thing. At 3:17 a.m., the sheriff and his team arrived. Black clothes. Silent steps. They had mapped every blind spot, every exit, every camera. His daughter stayed close, carrying only what she could handle. Non-lethal gear, just like her father taught her. They moved like ghosts through the back corridor of the warehouse, avoiding the main gate. Jack took out the first guard without a sound. Then another. Then came the hard part. The door. Steel reinforced, but the sheriff didn't hesitate. He placed the charge, looked at his daughter, and whispered, "This is for Claire." The blast was loud, but quick. They stormed in like a wave. Inside, the warehouse was chaos. Cartel members scrambled, weapons raised, shouting orders in Spanish, but they weren't ready. Not for a team like this. Not for a man who'd led SWAT raids across 3 states. Not for a sheriff whose daughter was watching everything he did and learning. In the middle of it all, Claire blinked through the smoke and saw her rescue walking toward her like something out of a dream. The sheriff untied her with shaking hands. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said. Then he turned to his daughter. "Get her out of here." She nodded, wrapping Claire's arm over her shoulder, moving fast but steady toward the exit. But the sheriff stayed behind, because this wasn't just about rescuing someone anymore. This was a message. He found the man with the scar, the one who'd made the video. The one who'd threatened his town, his family. They fought, not with words, but with fists, elbows, broken glass. The sheriff, bruised and bloodied, didn't stop until the man was down, and even then, he didn't speak. He just looked him in the eye and said, "Tell them, Pine Ridge isn't yours, and neither am I." By the time the team left, the warehouse was empty. Burning. The sheriff walked into the sunrise with his daughter and Claire beside him, and when he looked back one last time, he wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about peace. The kind you fight for, the kind you bleed for, and the kind you only earn when you protect what you love. The sun was rising by the time they made it home. Claire, bruised but alive, sat in the back of the sheriff's car, staring out the window at a town she hadn't seen in days. It still looked like Pine Ridge. Same quiet streets, same mailboxes, same crooked sign near Mason's diner. But something was different now. It felt like a place that had been through something and survived. At the station, the sheriff's daughter handed Claire a warm blanket and a cup of coffee. She didn't say much, just sat beside her like she had 100 times before at the community center. Sometimes, comfort didn't need words. The sheriff stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon like the sky might drop something unexpected. His knuckles were still swollen. His shirt was still stained. But he'd never stood taller. The fight was over. But the battle wasn't the story. What came next was. The town woke slowly. People stepped out of their houses like they weren't sure if it was safe yet. Some had heard the explosions. Others had seen the smoke. Most just waited for a sign. It came when the sheriff walked through Main Street. He wasn't in uniform. No badge. No patrol car. Just him. Walking, and beside him, his daughter, Claire, Jack, the ones who had seen the worst of it and were still here, still standing. The town didn't cheer, didn't clap, they just watched. And then, quietly, they followed. By the time he reached the steps of the community center, now blackened by smoke but still standing, half the town was behind him. He turned to them, eyes tired but sure. "I won't lie to you," he said. "We were under attack. They came into our town thinking we'd bend, thinking we'd break." He looked at his daughter, who nodded once. "But we didn't. You didn't. And we're still here." Someone in the crowd started to cry. Someone else started to clap, and just like that, the town remembered who they were. That afternoon, a crew of volunteers began clearing debris from the community center. Kids brought hammers and gloves. Retired folks brought lemonade and folding chairs. Even the ones who had stayed quiet during the worst of it showed up with paint buckets and apology pies. Because Pine Ridge wasn't broken, it was rebuilding. Better. Claire didn't leave. She stayed, helped with repairs, worked with the sheriff's daughter to launch a new program, one that didn't just focus on outreach, but on resilience, training, awareness, protection. People weren't just recovering, they were preparing. The sheriff kept his badge, but he wasn't the same lawman anymore. Something in him had shifted back into place. Not the rage, not the fear, but the clarity. He knew who he was now, not just a sheriff, not just a father, but a defender of something worth fighting for. 1 week later, a letter arrived from federal authorities. Quiet congratulations, a promise of support, but more importantly, a request for the evidence he'd recovered during the raid, the cartel ledger, names, accounts, routes. It was enough to dismantle more than just the branch that had touched Pine Ridge. It was enough to light up the entire web across 3 states. He turned it in without hesitation, but he kept one copy, just in case. Weeks passed. The town healed in small ways, one handshake at a time, one board nailed, one story told. People still looked over their shoulders sometimes, but not with fear, with caution, wisdom. And something else started to happen. Other towns called places, along the same corridor, asking questions. How did you fight back? What did you learn? How can we prepare? Pine Ridge had become something more than a headline. It had become an example. The sheriff's daughter led a workshop in the school gym. 20 chairs turned into 50, then 100. She taught more than safety. She taught strength. The quiet, kind. The kind that made people walk a little taller. At the end of one of those sessions, she stood at the front and said something simple. They thought we were weak. They were wrong. Outside, the sheriff waited for her beside his patrol car. He watched people leaving, smiling, hugging. He watched the sky turn golden with another small-town sunset. She walked over, leaning on the hood. "Still think I should have stayed out of it?" she asked. He smiled. "I think you saved this town." "No," she said. "We did." And he knew she was right, because none of them did it alone. It was a mechanic who left a tip in a mailbox, a teenager who showed up with a hammer when no one else would, a retired vet who offered up his old field radio without asking why, a town that piece by piece remembered who it was. Pine Ridge hadn't just survived a war. It had earned its peace, and it would protect it. Together, forever. Closing. Narration for YouTube video. So, what would you do to protect your town? How far would you go for your family? If this story touched something in you, If it reminded you that courage can come from the quietest places, then share it. Because the world needs to know. Sometimes the strongest heroes don't wear capes. They wear uniforms, aprons, tool belts, or nothing at all. And sometimes the loudest message isn't shouted. It's simply lived. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay strong, and never underestimate a small town with something to protect.